The topic today is photographing without a meter. When you hear people say, "Oh, you don't have a meter," you almost always hear somebody else say, "Oh, just use Sunny 16." I don't like Sunny 16. I think it's bad advice, and it's better just to replace it with something way more robust. I don't even know that I want to. If you don't know what Sunny 16 is, right, go look it up, or don't, right? If you like to shoot, right, if your idea of photographing is to go outside on a bright sunny day, then maybe learn Sunny 16, right? This type of like flower garden, trees and grass, and it's a bright sunny day and the sun is up high, right? If that's the type of photography you like to do, then fine, learn Sunny 16. But I rarely want to do that kind of photography. So that's not very helpful to me. So instead, what I've done is right, the amount of light in a scene. Right, we can measure it in several different units. Right, but it's basically just like how much light is in a scene or on a subject. Okay, and that can be converted into what's called an EV, or an exposure value. And each increment of an exposure value from like 7 to 8, right, is a doubling. Right? So much in photography is about a stop or a doubling. So again, that's what we're doing. One tick on the EV is a doubling. So what I've done is, right, if you tell me a scene, I'll know within one, right, what the EV will be. If you say, "Hey, I'm outside on a really sunny day and there's not really any clouds and there's very distinct shadows," I'll say, "Okay, that's an EV of 15, give or take one." And if you start to say, "Oh, it's actually pretty overcast, but it is the middle of the day," I might say, "Well, that's, probably an 11 and a half or a 12. And you say, "It's actually, kind of raining." And I say, "Well, that might be a 10 and a half or 11. And oh, it's the winter. It's the winter in the Pacific Northwest." Like, yeah, you maybe be an 11. Hope maybe, right? Oh, I'm out in the full sun and I'm up at elevation and there's some snow on the ground. Right? Okay, well, that might be a 16 or a 17. And I'm not just talking about daytime, right? I've learned all these for inside of stores or galleries, right? Or out on a sports field or night lighting, or specifically for me, right? I'm more interested in like the morning hours and the evening hours, and the lighting inside my house, window light, right? So a lot of my shots are in the like 5, 6, 7, 8 EV. Right, and when I go into stores, like, I'm perceptive to, is this store lit at hopefully not a 7, that's pretty dark for a store. Right? Is it an 8, a 9, is it a 10? Right, if I'm at sporting events, is the sporting field at a 7, which is sort of like danger zone, right? Or is it more like a 9, like it should be? Or is it a professional field, like a 10, right? Right. And I've learned these by looking at charts, right? There's a chart like this. There's a chart like the one on Wikipedia. Ansel Adams provides a chart. And so you can learn them by reading charts. Now, an even better way is actually just to measure them as you go about in your life. I like to use this spot meter, but I don't think that's a good recommendation for people. And really, the one I use the most is an app on my phone called Light Meter. It's easy to take like an average EV of a scene, or you can use it as a spot meter, and then it'll just tell you an EV value, and that's super handy, and it's on your phone, and I don't know, it's free. It is free, right? This one is $3.99, and it's I don't like it quite as much for getting EV values, but in terms of just having a light meter on your phone, it's a really good one too. So get both, see which one you like better. But I've tried a bunch, right? I've tried 20 different phone apps, and these are the best two. So, right, they can actually help you, right? Say, oh, I think that's a 5, and then check it. And, oh, I think that's an 8. Okay, we'll check it, right? And practice and see kind of how far you're off, and keep practicing until you are not really ever off by more than 1. Now Ansel Adams, he said people can't do this. Right? Even he's like, once you're sort of in a scene and you adjust to it, your brain's really not that good. And that was part of the reason. At some point I was like, all right, I'll just kind of get a meter and admit that I need a meter. But the truth is, like, between like all the charts I've looked at and the the practice I have at actually taking values, I'm pretty good at it. I think 9 times out of 10 I would be within 1, and that's plenty good. For getting a good usable shot on a negative. And also, I'll say just one more little bit about kind of practicing with more of a spot meter, is you can start to understand how much exposure range is in a different type of scene. Right? Is it from the shadows to the highlights? Is that 3 stops of light? Is that a factor of 8? Is that a factor of 60? Is it a factor of 1,000? Right, and I've gotten really good at sort of seeing where there's maybe 3 or 4 stops of light, which makes for lots of really nice photographs, versus sort of scenes that are 9 or 10, right? Like, if I'm in the forest and it's a full lit day, but there's also lots of hard shadows and the backsides of big trees and stumps, and I'm interested in that shadow detail, right? You can start to really want a huge range of exposure values. And then you might have to learn a thing or two about shooting in difficult scenes like that. But it helps you sort of, right, become aware of exposure values and exposure range and sort of what you might want to meter off of. Okay, but let's say you become like super good at knowing the EV value that you're wanting to make your midpoint, right, your middle gray. Well, then what? So that's what the rest of this video is going to be about. There's 2 patterns that you need to know. And the good news is I think you probably already know them. Okay, you need to know your powers of 2. 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1000, right? Which has been rounded in photography often, usually, to 2, 4, 8, 15, 30, 60, 125, 255. Right? In other words, your shutter speeds, right? Unless you have a really old camera. Okay, these are your shutter speeds, and each one represents a stop. Okay, but back to, these are 2 to the power of something. Right, 2 to the 1 is 2. 2 to the 2 is 4. 2 to the 10 is 1,000. Right, you say, well, why do I need to know that? Well, you need to know that if you're at 1,000, that the factor on that, EV factor, is a 10, because that's 2 to the 10th. Right, so you could think of like, well, how many steps away from 1 am I? Well, guess what? You're 10 steps away. Right? But you could count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, up to 10. Okay, however you want to do it. But I just have, right, I know my 2 to the what? 2 to the 6. Well, that's 60th. Right? What's 2 to the 0? 1. Right? So what's 2 to the 11th? Well, 2,000. Right? I know all these things. Right? So you learn them too. Right? The other pattern, and this one is like, come on, if you're going to be a photographer, right? this needs to be more, not just tattooed on your arm, it needs to be tattooed in your brain. Okay, the other one is also a pattern you probably know. 1.4, 2, 2.8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32. What are these? Well, these are the f-stops on a lens. Right, aperture, whole stop aperture settings. Right, but what are they really? Right, well, they're the powers of square root of 2. Right, so this is the square root of 2 to the 0 is 1. The square root of 2 to the first power is 1.4. Square root of 2 to the second power is 2. Square root of 2 to the third power is 2.8. Right? So, right, learning, right, this list and being able to go from, well, what's 8? Well, that's square root of 2 to the 6th. Now, again, it might just be easier to think about. There's sort of a shortcut here. So, right, 1.4 is 1. 2 is 2. Oh, that's nice. 2.8 is 3. Oh, that's nice. 4 is 4. Ooh, 5.6 is 5. I like it. But then we get away. It starts to pull away a little bit. 8 is 6. 11 is 7. 16 is 8. Okay. But still, if you can kind of have this range, which is mostly what we're using, right? What's 5.6? Well, that's an EV of 5. What's 2.8? Well, that's a factor of 3. All right, so now that I've overwhelmed you, or maybe not, maybe you're a master of these. You should be, I hope. Now let's come back to how do we put it all together. So let's say we are, let's say our target EV, let's say we're shooting a scene that has an EV of 10. Now that's maybe a rainy, overcast day, and we're maybe approaching 3:30, 4 p.m. That might be in like a bright store. That might be at a night football game that's got really big lighting. Okay, but let's just say EV of 10. All right, so I like to think of this as sort of having two numbers on each side of the equation, and sort of does. It makes everything addition, and it it's nice to have, instead of having one number on the left and three numbers on the right, it's just like two numbers on each side. That's, for me, that makes the mental math a little simpler. So my target, ignore this 14 for a second. My target is going to be 10. So let's say I'm shooting with Tri-X. Okay, so my film speed is 400. Oh, I guess I didn't talk about the... so let's talk about these three little visuals here. So the middle one is the shutter speed factor, right? We just covered that. So like a 60th is 2 to the 6. In other words, the EV factor is a 6, right? I just recreated that list we looked at in the Excel file right here, right? The 1000th, that's an EV factor of 10. Okay, and then over here is the aperture one, right? 2.8 is 3, 4 is 4, right? So I just brought these over into this file. But then I also needed to do film speed. So 100 film speed is a 0. And then we get, we increment from there, right? Stops. So like a 200. Now, because I've put it on the left side of this equation, what's nice about that is that these are positives as we go into the commonly used 200, 400, 800 speed, right? So let's shoot Tri-X. So that's, right, 2 stops away from 100 speed film. It's nice. 100 is the 0 point, right? So 2 stops away, so 400, so that's going to be a 2. And then my target I set is a 10. So my target is a 10 plus my 2. So what's 10 plus 2? 12. Okay, here we go. So 12 is what I'm looking for. So then I say I got to come over here and I need to find two numbers that add to 12. Well, 10 plus 2, 8 plus 4, 6 plus 6, whatever, right? And so I can come over here and I got to find two that are going to add to 12. So maybe I'll grab 7 and 5. 12 equals 12. So again, on the left side is my target EV, and then I make an adjustment for the film speed. So that was 2. So I'm aiming for 10, but my film is actually going to bring that up to 12, which, think about it, right? making a faster film sort of makes it, it's like now there's even kind of like even more light, even though there's not, right? But films cheat, kind of helping you cheat. So you get 10 plus 2. So now you're sort of going for that 12. Right? And then you just look for any combination of shutter speed and aperture, right, where the EV factors are going to add to 12. What's another one? So let's say you got a Summilux and you say, oh, I want to use 1.4 and shooting tri-X, and then what would you need? All right, 10 plus 2 is 12, 1 plus 11. And then you go on your M7 and you find out that you don't have 2000th, and you say, shoot. And then you say, I'll switch it to 1000th and F2. Right. Or you just shoot 1.4 and 1000th, and you know that you just gave it a little extra exposure than it wanted, but hey, right, a little overexposure rarely does any harm. All right, so if you shoot 100 speed film, this gets even easier. So let's say now we're shooting out in the bright sun, and it actually is an EV of 15 because you're shooting flowers and grass in full sun at noon in the middle of the summer in Rochester, New York. So your film speed's going to be 100. Well, that means you're looking for 15. Well, I need to pick a combination that are going to add up to 15. Well, I'm probably going to want to use all the shutter speed I've got, so I'm going to grab 1000th. So that's 10. So that means I need an aperture of 5. Sorry, my son came in and wants to play basketball, so I got interrupted there, and I said yes, so this is now going to wrap up fast here. Right. My shutter speed was 1000, so that gives me 10 to the 10th. And then that means I got to choose an aperture of 5.6. That 10 plus 5 will give me the 15. Now, if I say, oh, no, it wasn't 100, it's 400, well, that gives me an additional 2 on the left side. So that's going to be 13 plus 2 is, not a target of 13. I'm shooting for a target of, my target is going to be is 15, right? I said full sun, Rochester, New York. 15 plus 2 is 17. So now I got to find 2 more. I can't do it with the shutter speed. So now I got to do it with an aperture of 11 because, right, I have to go from 5.6 is 5 and then one more to 8. F8 is going to be 6. F11 will be 7. So I get 10 plus 7 is 17, which is my 15 plus my film speed correction or adjustment of an additional 2. Okay. So again, there's sort of like learning your EVs, then you make that adjustment for your film speed, and that gives you like the target. And then once you have that, I've kind of used the word target in a couple different ways. Sorry about that. Let me try again. So you have the EV of your scene, then you make the film speed adjustment, right? You add those two things, and now this becomes like the target number that you're trying to get to with your aperture and your shutter speed choices. So I'm going to just do one more really common one for me, which is like an EV of like 6 or 7 inside my house with kind of beautiful evening light coming in a window. Let's say 7. And I often shoot with like an 800 speed, so that gives me another 3. So that's 7 plus 3 is 10. I'm probably shooting people, so I at least want to use a 60th. So I got to choose 6, and that means I could use a 4. But I like using an aperture of 2.8, so really I could shoot a 1/25th. So I could shoot f2.8, 1/25th with a film speed of 800 for a scene that has an EV of 7. Voila. You can see how this is starting to work. So now I'm not married to, I can only go out and shoot if the EV is 15, right? I can shoot any scene, right? I can go back to this long list of exposure values and say, I'm shooting around a Christmas tree, probably a 4, right? I'm shooting a fountain with lights, probably a 3 or 4. Oh, I'm shooting circus, floodlit circus, right? Or I'm shooting the Milky Way galactic center, right? Or I'm shooting a rainbow, or I'm shooting fireworks, right? It's like, um, so way more options than just going out into full sun. Which I'm gonna say I actually don't like the Sunny 16 anyways. I think often if you're shooting in that much sun, especially if it's like 35 millimeter film, you probably want to give it a little extra exposure. So you probably want to actually, instead of shooting for an EV of 15, it's probably an EV of 14. So it's not really f16 anyways. It's probably Sunny 11. But don't learn that one anyways. Learn this better way. All right, take care.